There is a thing that happened. You know what it is. You are not waiting for permission to know it, and you are not here to be told it gently. The door closed, not in anger. That is what surprises people who were not paying attention. It closed the way a season closes without announcement, without the sound of a ledge, without anyone standing in the room to witness it. And when they came back, the way they always come back, they found that the handle no longer moved. You recognize this. This is not coldness. I want you to hear that clearly because the word they will use, a word they are already using, is cold. They will say you changed. They will say something happened to you. They will say you used to be different. A warmer, more available, easier to reach. And what they mean, though they will not say it this precisely, is that you used to cost less. Access to you used to be something they could take without asking, and now it isn't, and they do not know what to do with that because, one told them the rules had changed. No one told them because there was no announcement. There was only the fact of the closed door. What I want to speak about today is not the moment of closing. That moment, I suspect, is long behind you. But what I want to speak about is what comes after the empath. And I use that word carefully, not as a category, not as a badge, but as a description of someone who has spent a significant portion of their life organized around the emotional states of others. What comes after that person finally, quietly, completely decides that a particular human being no longer deserves unrestricted access to their interior life. What that decision looks like from inside, what it does to the people on the other side of it, and what it reveals psychologically about what was happening all along. I have sat with this question in one form or another for most of my working life, not as a theorist, but as someone who watched it happen again and again. The people who came to me in the middle of lives that had been, for decades, organized around others. I watched them discover something. I watched the discovery unsettle them and then slowly stabilize them. And what I came to understand is this: the decision to withdraw access, real access, interior access. A kind of access that lets someone's mood change your day is not a decision made in anger. Anger is too loud, too visible, too easily tracked and managed by the people who have spent years learning how to manage you. The real withdrawal is quieter. It is finished before it is announced. It is, in fact, finished before you yourself can fully name it. There is a moment, and perhaps you recognize it when you realize that you were already on the other side of something, and you are not certain when you crossed. I have called this in my work on transformation a threshold event, not a decision in the ordinary sense. A threshold event is something the psyche completes before conscious mind ratifies it. You do not decide to stop letting someone in. You discover one ordinary afternoon that the door is already closed, that the warmth you once extended automatically, the way a hand opens without instruction, no longer moves on its own. And you notice that you are not distressed by this. You are, in fact, very still. That stillness is not numbness. People will call it numbness. People who are distressed by your stillness will say you have gone numb. You have shut down. You are not processing. You are avoiding. This is what it looks like from the outside, from the side of the door that no longer opens. From inside, it feels like something else entirely. It feels like a body that has finally been allowed to rest. It feels like a strange relief of no longer needing to perform the labor of emotional availability to someone who was not spending their energy the way you were. Spending yours. The door is the first symbol I want to carry through this lecture with you. Not a dramatic door, not a slammed door, not a locked fortress, not a wall. A door that simply one day, stopped opening to a particular hand. The house is still there. You are still inside it. Other doors in other directions may still open freely. But this one, to this person, in this direction, does not move anymore. And what is psychologically significant is not that the door closed. It is that you are no longer standing on your side of it, wondering if you should open it again. That wondering, that perpetual standing at the interior door, asking yourself whether you owe someone the labor of your warmth, was the central psychological fact of a period of your life that has now ended. I want to name that period clearly, because naming it is the only way to understand what its ending means. There is a structure that develops in people who are, from very early in life, trained to be emotionally available. Trained not by instruction, but by necessity, by the simple fact that their availability was what kept a system functioning. Certain families organize themselves around one person's capacity to absorb, regulate, translate, and soften the emotional content that cannot otherwise be metabolized by the group. That person learns young, learns fast, learns so thoroughly that the learning disappears into reflex that their primary value is relational. That they are most safe when they are most useful. That the safest way to prevent chaos is to feel what others are feeling before they feel it themselves, and to respond to it before they ask. This is not empathy in the romantic sense. This is adaptation. This is the psyche doing what it must in order to survive a particular emotional environment. And what it creates, over years, over decades, is a person who has a finely developed capacity for attuning to others and a nearly complete absence of practice in the question of their own. Key or access. Who gets it? Under what conditions? At what key? A toast? In my work with patients again and again across years, I observe something that I came to think of as the permeability problem. The person who comes to me has become, through years of this kind of adaptation, too permeable. Their boundaries, and I do not use that word in the therapeutic self-help sense. I mean the psychological membrane between self and other. The thing that allows you to be in contact with another person's reality without losing track of your own, their membrane, has become so thin that the distinction between their own emotional state and the states of the people around them is nearly impossible to locate. They do not know. In a given moment, whether what they are feeling belongs to them. They have become, in a very real sense, a surface that others write on. And what happens to that surface when a particular person has written on it for long enough, in ways that are careless enough? That repeat the same overwriting enough times? What happens is that the surface changes not through decision, not through therapy necessarily, or insight, or even pain. The surface hardens, not everywhere, not to everyone, but in the precise location where the same hand is pressed too many times, with too little care for what was there before. This is the beginning of what I want to call the excess event, the moment when the permeable self, a self that was always open to this particular person, undergoes a quiet structural change. The door does not slam. The door simply stops being a door that opens to this hand. What you feel in that moment, or rather, what you feel in the days and weeks after you notice it has happened, is not victory. It is not relief, exactly. What you feel is something more like recognition. The recognition of a fact that turns out to have been true for longer than you knew. The recognition that you had already moved away from this person emotionally. That the warmth you were still extending was already a kind of performance. Not because you were being dishonest, but because the honest interior had already quietly withdrawn, and the performance was running on a habit that had not yet caught up with the new reality inside you. That gap between the performance and the interior is one of the most psychologically important spaces I know. I have seen people live inside that gap for years, continuing to show up, continuing to answer, continuing to extend the warmth and the availability and the emotional labor that the other person expects. That the relationship has trained them to provide, all while the interior has already moved somewhere quieter. All while something inside them has already, in some room they were not quite ready to acknowledge, closed the door. A question this lecture wants to sit with is what happens when the gap closes, when the performance finally catches up with the interior. When the warmth is no longer running on residual habit, and the other person, the one who expected the door, to open encounters for the first time, a door that does not move. What they do next is the thing I want to examine carefully, because it tells you everything about what the relationship was. It tells you what they thought you were, and it tells you, in a way that is difficult to look at directly, what you were allowing yourself to be. I have seen people in this moment try first the familiar handles, the ones that always worked. The tone of voice that used to produce a response, the appeal to shared history, the invocation of what you once were to each other. These are the ordinary tools people reach for when a door they expect to open does not. They are not necessarily manipulative. Not at first. They are simply the natural responses of someone who has been, until very recently, accustomed to access. But when those tools do not work, when the door remains closed, when the warmth does not return, when the emotional availability does not reconstitute itself on schedule, something else begins, and that something else is what I want to spend the rest of this lecture examining. Because it is in that something else that the full psychological truth of the relationship becomes visible, not only to you, but to you seeing yourself clearly, perhaps for the first time in a long while, as someone who had something worth what they reach for next. What comes next is guilt. Not always consciously, I want to be precise about that, because if you understand it as a conscious strategy, you will misread what is happening, and you will spend your energy in the wrong place. It is not, in most cases, the deliberate deployment of guilt as a tool. It is something older than that. It is the natural response of a psyche that has organized itself around your availability and now finds that availability withdrawn, and experiences that withdrawal as abandonment, as punishment, as a wound inflicted by your silence that must be, by some means, through some lever, reversed. And the lev, they reach for is the one that has always worked. You have a history together. That history, in their account of it, has been rewritten slightly, not through malice, but through the unconscious process by which the psyche protects itself from information it cannot metabolize. In their account, they were not careless. They were overwhelmed. They were struggling. They were doing their best. And you were the one who was always there. Who always came back, who always eventually absorbed the difficult thing and continued. And the story they have told themselves about that pattern is not a story about extraction. It is a story about connection, about how much you meant to each other, about how you, of all people, understood them. This is the guilt lever, not the accusation of wrongdoing. Not primarily. The guilt lever is the appeal to the connection itself, the implication that by closing the door, you are destroying something real. That the silence you have chosen is a form of oculence against the shared history between you. That whatever they did, it could not possibly warrant this meaning your interior withdrawal. Your stillness, your refusal to be reached. I want to name what happens in you when this lever is pulled, because this is where the psychological precision matters most. There is a moment you may know it when the guilt arrives, and you feel it land. You feel its weight, the familiar heaviness in the chest, the faint contraction somewhere behind the sternum, the pull toward the telephone, toward the message, toward the reopening of something you have already internally closed. That physical response is real. Do not dismiss it. It is not weakness. It is not a sign that you are wrong. It is the body's memory of the years it spent responding to exactly this signal, organizing itself around exactly this frequency, producing exactly this movement toward the other person as its primary mode of self-regulation. The guilt feels like conscience, but it is not conscience. It is a reflex trained into you by a relationship that depended, for its functioning, on your capacity to be moved by exactly this kind of pressure. The guilt is the old door still capable of being pushed. Still responsive to the old weight, even though you are no longer standing on the other side of it in the same way. In my work on the persona, the mask the psyche develops in order to function within its relational environment, I observed something that I think is relevant here. The persona is not false in a simple sense. It is not a lie. It is a real psychological structure, developed through genuine adaptation. That allows a person to participate in a social and relational world, but it carries with it a danger that is easy to miss. Which is this: the persona can become so well developed, so efficient, so rewarded by the environment it operates within, that the person inside it loses track of where the persona ends and the self begins. For the pers, and I am describing the one whose primary adaptation was emotional availability, the persona of warmth, of accessibility, of responsiveness became so fundamental to how they moved through their relational world that they could no longer easily locate the difference. Between the warmth they genuinely felt and the warmth they produced because the situation required it, because the other person needed it, because not producing it would create a disturbance they would then have to manage. This is the core of what I am trying to name. The relationship, this particular relationship, with this particular person was organized from very early on around your persona, not around you. Around the version of you that opened doors, that absorbed difficult things, that returned calls, that continued. And when you not the persona, but the actual interior self began to withdraw, what the other person experienced was not the withdrawal of a person. They experienced the withdrawal of a function. And the panic that followed is the panic of a system that has lost a component it relied on, not the grief of someone who has lost a person they genuinely knew. That distinction is uncomfortable. I want to sit with you inside the discomfort of it for a moment, because it is the kind of thing the mind resists. It is easier to believe that the relationship was mutual, that what you experienced as extraction, they experienced as exchange, that the access they took, they understood themselves to be earning, or deserving, or participating in fairly. It is easier to believe this because the alternative is that they organized themselves around a version of you that was never quite a real, and that the real you, the interior you, the you that existed below the warmth and the availability and the reliable returning, was not someone they were particularly curious about. It was not someone they spent much energy trying to know. I have seen the moment when this becomes undeniable. When a patient sits in the room with me and finally allows themselves to see that the person they are grieving, the relationship they are mourning, was not in fact a relationship in which they were fully present as a person. They were present as a function, as a surface, as the one who absorbed, regulated, and returned. And the grief that follows that recognition is not simple. It is layered. There is grief for the relationship itself, for the version of it they believed in, the version that felt like genuine connection. And beneath that grief, something stranger and more difficult to faint. Disorienting recognition that their own absence from the relationship was not only something the other person allowed. It was something they participated in, something they, in their own way, chose. Because the persona is comfortable, or rather, it is familiar, which the body reads as safe, the familiar labor of emotional availability, the known rhythm of absorbing and returning, the practic, audited movement of opening the door when the knock arrives. These are not only impositions from outside, they become, over years, a way of being in the world that the self has organized itself around a structure that, despite its cost, provides a kind of certainty. I know what I am in this relationship. I know what is expected. I know how to be useful. I know how to be valued. What the closing of the door removes is not just a burden. It removes the certainty as well. And that loss of certainty, the loss of knowing what you are in relation to this person, of knowing what your value is, knowing what the structure of the connection requires of you, is part of what makes the withdrawal feel, from inside, so strange. So quiet in a way that is different from peace. It is the quiet of an identity that is in the process of reorganizing itself. The persona, the available one, the reliable one, the one who opens doors, is losing a relational context in which it knew its own outline. And, what the psyche must now do, slowly, is discover what the self looks like when it is no longer defined primarily by its accessibility to this particular person. This is not a simple process. Do not let anyone tell you it is simple. The reassuring narrative that healing means clarity, that the closed door is followed immediately by freedom, that withdrawal from a draining relationship produces instant relief, that narrative is, in my experience, incomplete. What actually happens is stranger and less comfortable than that. What actually happens is that you find yourself, for a period, unsure of your own edges, unsure where you end, and the old expectation begins reaching sometimes. For the old reflex, the warmth. A response, the door beginning to open and catching itself. Not because you have decided rationally to keep the door closed, but because the interior self, the deeper self, simply does not produce the movement anymore. And in that gap in the moment between the old reflex and the absence of the response, something becomes visible. What becomes visible is the structure, the actual architecture of the relationship. Underneath the warmth that covered it, underneath the history and the connection and the shared language of two people who have known each other for a significant period of time,